Then in 1964, I had the opportunity, the legal opportunity, to use lysergic acid diethylamide tartrate, LSD, from the Sandoz company in Switzerland. So I climbed into the tank at that time and freaked out completely. I was absolutely terrified, and I hallucinated a memo from the National Institute of Mental Health, where I'd been working the previous 5 years, which said nobody ever takes LSD alone. One of the researchers took it alone, and his tape recorder ate him. I injected 100 micrograms, 100 thousandth of a gram of LSD, and then an hour later another 100 micrograms, and then an hour after that another. The effects lasted for 8 hours, and I think that was self-programmed because that's what the literature said, it should last 8 hours. Even after the law in the United States came in 1966 that made it illegal, I was one of the 210 investigators that could use it legally because I had a fellowship from the National Institute of Mental Health. And so I had direct access to it from Sandoz company. Previous to this, I had been in the National Institute of Health Commissioned Officers Corps for 5 years. And I'd worked in the National Institute of Mental Health and the National Institute of Neurological Disease and Blindness. And it was after that that these experiments took place. And I got the fellowship from the National Institute of Mental Health. I wrote a report to the fellowship board of the National Institute of Mental Health when my fellowship was up after 5 years. And you can now buy that report, and it's called the Programming and Metaprogramming the Human Biocomputer. And as I've explained in the introduction to this, the first 40 pages were designed so that the fellowship board wouldn't read the rest of the report. It was a very long philosophical discussion, and LSD wasn't mentioned until about page 50. 2 questions.
Also a couple questions, yeah.
At the time you were doing your experience with LSD, was Walter Cronkite and Leary and all those guys doing the same thing, or were you hit by that?
Oh, you see, I was in the Virgin Islands when I was doing it, totally out of contact with the United States, practically, for a matter of 5 years. And I was very surprised when I came back to find out what they'd been doing. And they were very surprised to find out what I'd been doing because it was so different. Now let's find out where dolphins come into all this. Since I was floating around the tank in 1954, I was trying to figure out who was floating around 24 hours a day. I was having so much fun, I would envy anybody who could stay 24 hours a day. So Professor Per Scholander said, well, go see the dolphins. So I went down to Marine Studios, and immediately was zapped by the dolphins, and they took off for as far as I was concerned, and I had to start research with them.
Did you include there, Dr. Lilly, that you were taken by dolphins in person, or you met dolphins in person, before you started studying them? You were in a tank, and you wondered what kind of things were floating around 24 hours a day.
That's right.
And
yes.
then?
And then I went to Florida and met the dolphins.
You met them?
Yeah.
Meaning, how did you meet them?
Well, we were doing research on their brains.
You're doing research on their brains. So did you meet them in the water, or
yeah.
How did that meeting take place?
In captivity.
In captivity. Okay.
So after being in Florida, I decided to set up my own dolphin research program in the Virgin Islands, where the water temperature was just right. This meant I had to leave the National Institute of Health, and I did that after I was there 5 years. And I'd done some dolphin research, but I wanted to do it full time. So I founded the Communication Research Institute in the St. Thomas in the United States Virgin Islands. And I managed to get various government organizations to furnish the money to build a laboratory and to support that research there. That included the Department of Defense, NASA, National Institute of Health, and some private foundations.
You got a grant from the Ministry of Defense?
The Defense Department.
Defense Department?
The Department of Defense, the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and so on. We had $500,000 a year budget. The laboratory was built there in 1959, and we imported 3 dolphins from Florida, Peter, Pam, and Sissy. And there they had a pool down at sea level, and on the second floor there were we flooded the whole top of the second floor, and that's where Margaret lived with Peter the dolphin. You'll hear him later. And then right next door to this was the isolation tank, filled with seawater. So when I did my 60 experiments with LSD, it was over the dolphin pool they were done in the isolation tank. Well, the work went on there from 1960 to 1968, and then I abandoned work with dolphins in that particular way. Then moved to the United States and went into LSD research at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center. I then left there and went to California and more or less retired from this sort of work, and this is when I wrote all the books. I wrote 5 books about dolphins and 5 more about LSD and ketamine. And then in 1972, I married Antonetta, and we've set up 5 isolation tanks on our place in Malibu. And 500 people went through the isolation tanks and wrote reports on their experiences. 50 of these reports are in the book The Deep Self, the Use of the Isolation Tank. Each one of these reports is very different. Everybody's mind is different. Some of the people took ketamine, some took LSD, some used nothing whatsoever. Ketamine I was introduced to in 1973. Well, let me go back a little bit. I left out the period of 1971 before I married Tony. I went to South America and joined a esoteric school run by Oscar Chazo. I stayed in this for 7 months and learned many techniques of esoteric techniques from the yoga and the Sufis and the Shiites and so forth. This turned out to be very powerful sort of programming. And this helped me no end when later I came across ketamine. Oscar Chazo had been trained in many different esoteric schools in Abyssinia, Iran, India, and China. But he never used LSD, so I brought LSD down to his school and taught him how to use it. Then I wrote the book called Center of the Cyclone about all this, and brought it all up to date for 1973. It was published in 1972. And in 1973, I was doing workshops at the National Institute of Health, and on the opening day of one of the workshops, I had a migraine attack. I'd had migraine every 18 days from age 7. I was now 57 at this time. I got this migraine attack, and so I appealed to the local doctor. His name was Craig Elliott, and he put me in an isolation tank and injected something in my shoulder. He gave me a small dose, and my headache left the right side of my head, went out about 3 feet or a meter, and came back. And then he doubled the dose, and it went out about 3 meters, and he came back. And he tripled the dose, and it went out over the horizon, and it hasn't been back since.
Small migraine.
How much did you take ketamine for the migraine?
I didn't know it was ketamine.
Oh, okay.
He injected, let's see, he injected 1 milliliter first time, 2 milliliters the second time, and 3 milliliters the third time. He told me afterwards that it was ketamine hydrochloride, which he had discovered had the psychedelic effects, like LSD, that lasted about 20 minutes. He discovered this when he read the Physician's Desk Reference, the PDR, when he was an intern. And if you look at that publication, you'll see there's a warning on the writing up of ketamine. Warning, emergent symptoms. Some people will hallucinate, some will have delusions, some will have illusions, some will travel out of the body, and they go on and list all these things. And when Craig read that, he said, "Oh, LSD, psychedelic. Let's try it." So he and all his friends in the internship tried it, and that's how he happened to use it on me.
What are the street names for ketamine?
What is the what?
Are there street names for ketamine?
Angel dust.
Is that the only one?
No, PCP is a predecessor of ketamine. It was called Serenity. And let's see. Well, I forgot what the names, street names are. Most people use the straight name because it's still legal. You can obtain it by prescription from an anesthesiologist or a veterinarian. You want to treat your cat.
PCB is used as an animal tranquilizer.
That's right. It lasts too long. I took a shot of 42 milligrams of it. I was out for 5 days and nights. Well, when it effectively cured my migraine, I got interested, and for the next 13 months I took it quite frequently, in doses all the way up to 300 milligrams. I've restricted myself since then to about 150 maximum, because above that one goes unconscious. It becomes a true anesthetic. So for 13 months I was badgering my medical friends and anesthesiologists and so on to get it, and also veterinarians. And at one point I took 50 milligrams every hour on the hour for 22 hours a day for 3 weeks.
Why?
Because I wanted to stay in the other realities which are opened up by ketamine.
So you didn't sleep for 5 days?
No, I said 22 hours a day. I slept 2 hours every night.
Was that enough?
It turned out it was.
Did you ever mix ketamine with other?
Pardon?
Did you ever try it in combination with other drugs?
A combination of what?
With other drugs.
Ketamine with other drugs.
No, there's no point in it.
Well, you tried it with hydrogen so that you could recall. With hydrogen so that you could have more
Hydrogen
recall.
in the drug. It's a placebo.
Describe that other reality that brought you to?
This is written up in my book called The Scientist, a metaphysical autobiography. And in the only place to take ketamine is in the tank. If you have to take it out of the tank, be sure you stay in bed, because if you start walking, you may fall down. I fell down about a year ago with it, and broke a shoulder. So I don't recommend that you walk around with it. The other realities are everything I experienced on LSD, other superhuman intelligences traveling through the universe, going through doorways into all of the realities which are very difficult to describe. Most of it is beyond words. As William James said in 1911, the other realities are separated from this one by the flimsiest of screens. And I think that screen, most of the substance of that screen is language. So that when you try to go in the other realities and come back and describe it, it's totally inadequate. You can only get about 1/10 of 1%, unless you're talking to somebody who's been there also. Now let me tell you about one case, which is easily described. My wife Tony had cancer, and we went to Fort Worth, Texas to get a holistic treatment for the cancer. And while we were there, at 2 o'clock in the morning, I took 200 milligrams of ketamine, lay down in a lounge chair in the middle of a couple of tennis courts, and suddenly a character arrives on a cosmic motor scooter and took me aboard and took me off into a cosmic amusement park where you go through various dimensions and go through all sorts of trips. Then he came and dumped me back. Well, I told that story at Esalen, at one of the psychedelic conferences there, and suddenly a man from British Columbia in Canada said, "What date was that?" And we tried to figure it out, and it turned out that he had the same experience the same night on ketamine.
Was he the driver?
Oh Lord, no.
He was.
This is an entity from another set of dimensions.
Okay. I just want to know.
So you got to ride like you.
Yeah.
That's what happens.
No, if you've ever had such an experience as that, you'll never forget it.
Did you ever have similar coincidences when you were above the tank in the Virgin Islands with the dolphins' behavior and kind of what you were thinking about in the tank?
No.
Never?
I think it was happening unconsciously, but I had no proof of that.
In the Japanese translation, it's he says you dream these things. What would you say in English to be more specific?
Pardon?
You said that you're not dreaming when you're on ketamin, but the Japanese translation turns out to be dreaming these things, the cosmic motorcycle. What would you say to be more specific in English?
Well, it's not even like dreaming. I'm not asleep, I'm aware, totally aware, and I stay aware during the whole experience and afterward. And I knew that I'd taken ketamine.
Is ketamine the door to the other reality, or does it create the other reality?
Well, what it does is change the chemical configuration of your brain so that you become sensitive to radiations which you normally aren't aware you're sensitive to. For instance, I could take ketamine and lie down in my home in Malibu and see Channel 10 on TV from San Diego and hear and see what was going on. So that ought to be investigated because it's very specific and very scientific and easily carried out.
So it tunes you onto something which you are not tuned into in normal reality.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that can be controlled as a user, or you're basically at the mercy of the...
Well, I think that one has to have a lot of discipline to do that experiment.
You received that discipline when you were in South America?
Yes.
Meditation?
Yeah.
You had said that one of the barriers with the other realities is language. When you actually get into the other realities, how do you communicate?
Directly mind to mind.
Mind to mind. So it's not you don't really have, like oftentimes when we think in words, it seems. You were able to think without the words, just...
That's right.
With the size of cetaceans' brains, is it possible to communicate mind to mind with them on the intellect?
Yes, of course.
Have you had experience with that?
Yes. Many times.
During the course of your esoteric studies and whatnot, did you come across ways to induce LSD like states of consciousness without drugs?
Yes, I've done several experiments with hypnosis with friends, and I could reproduce some things that I'd done on LSD with hypnosis. I can also, in odd times, have experienced in the tank without any drugs.
I was wondering if you had ever given ketamine to the dolphins.
No, but I gave LSD to them.
How did you like it?
And I gave it to 6 different dolphins. And they all had good trips. They would swim along the surface of the pool and then turn their beaks down, turn on their sonar. And I realized that they were doing the same thing I had done on my first trip on LSD. When the floor disappeared and I stamped my foot on the floor to find it, I was seeing the stars through the earth. So they were turning on their sonar to find the bottom of the pool. So their eyes said it wasn't there, but their sonar said it was.
I have a question on that. Is when you were in that separate sensory deprivation state and going to motor scooter realms, were you able to have contact with the dolphins there or any kind of relationship?
On that particular session?
No, I mean at any level. Was there any kind of...
Oh yes, I had a tank beside the dolphin pool at Marine World, and I communicated with them by sound, electrically, and then I got involved with the dolphin group mind, and that scared the hell out of me.
In what way?
Well, it's just too much to grasp. And I said to myself, I could stand one dolphin, but having a group mind is too much.
How far could you get in communicating with the dolphins verbally? I mean, how large vocabulary did the dolphins use, or did you get them to do sentences with nouns, verbs, adjectives?
Well, it's difficult to answer because they would respond to spoken commands quite easily, but we couldn't understand the return sounds that they were making, even with a computer. It's a one-way street.
In your altered state experiences, did you ever reach a place that if you crossed over, it was like a point of no return? And if you did you ever cross over?
What do you mean?
A place that if you went, hard with words here, if you went beyond this point, that there would be no return back to this body. There'd be no more whoever you are returning back to this body.
I was terrified that might happen. And maybe it did, and there's somebody else in this body than was there before.
Hence,
it's called walk-ins.
Walk-in, okay.
Is that a joke? He's asking? No, it's not a joke. It's not.
Right here.
Yes.
You said that you established communication with the dolphins, but that you could understand command, but you couldn't understand the return. But still, you said you established communication. So does that mean that communication was beyond words?
Well, I don't think we've established communication with them. I think it's, communication was occurring on all sorts of levels. Physical contact, acoustic, and swimming, and all that, and even the sexual level.
Mm-hmm. So the actually language is no help for communication.
Language is what?
It's no help for communication.
Well, I think it will be eventually. Enough people get working on it. I still have hope.
In experiments to attempt to communicate with primates, a number of different keyboards and that type of a communication system has been used. Has something like that been tried with the dolphins? And if not, what do you think of it as a possible means of understanding their replies?
Well, I think it's possible to do it. Nobody's tried it. But you have to have the proper keyboard of the size rated for dolphins.
This is a question getting back to when you experienced the fear of communicating with the group mind of the dolphin. So he would like a bit more information on what you mean by the group mind. Was this the mind of all dolphins everywhere that was so huge and complex? Or was it just the hugeness of that dolphin's mind? A little bit more information, please, on group mind.
There's no way to distinguish between the two. Between the huge mind of one dolphin and multiple. But it felt as though there were many voices taking place.
Were the vocalizations of the dolphins ever recorded during their LSD testing?
We didn't give ketamine. You mean on LSD?
Yes.
No, we didn't record it. Yes.
Did you do any experimentation with dolphins and music and how they react to music? And
Yes. I put up the situation in a tank with Peter, in which he had to pull on a rubber band, a long rubber band, and he put it in his mouth and pull. If he pulled far enough, it turned on the music, but he had to keep swimming and holding the switch closed. And we found that we left this on 24 hours, and he pulled for 8 of those 24 hours. He liked classical and rock.
In your experiments, both with the dolphins and with altered states, as I hear this question, it is, were you doing these experiments in order to find the limits of one's consciousness or to transcend the limits of consciousness? Is that right?
Yeah. Well, when you find out what the limits are, you then have to do the next operation, which is transcend them. Yes, that was working that way. Yes.
Quality of the communication of dolphins is it different from humans, and level or quality or whatever?
Well, we didn't get into semantic levels, which we'd like to get into, but on the frequency levels, they're very much higher frequencies and they speak very much faster than we do. So we haven't been able to untangle any of this.
So it could be more complicated than human beings.
Yes, much more. 5 voices at once from one dolphin.
Can I just say, so they have to have a group mind, because if they can't become unconscious, they don't have voluntary breathing like we do. So if something happens to one dolphin, the others have to push it up to the surface, and that necessitates that they live in groups. So when you hear stories about those lone dolphins, sometimes you hear them around England and Ireland, it always worries me, because I know that means they've been, somehow it's maybe a young male and they've been kind of pushed out of the pod. But they have midwives too for birthing. But this simple thing about the breathing reflex means that they have to live in a group.
To be reminded of breathing also, you mean?
Well, if they become unconscious, they have to be pushed up to the surface. If we become unconscious, we can still breathe. They don't.
Their breathing is strictly voluntary.
Yes. That's also something in
So
terms of
how do they see?
every breath they take is conscious.
How do they sleep?
Half a brain at a time.
Do they have any idea what percentage of the dolphin brain is not devoted to motor, auditory, and visual centers?
It's the same as ours.
It's exactly the same.
Yeah, they have huge silent areas just the way we do.
Another way to ask it would be that, how much is devoted to thinking and processing.
Well, all of the monkey brain is sensory motor. I showed that in the conscious monkey. Only about 1/10, in other words 100 grams, of our brain is devoted to that, sensory motor. And our brain is 1,500 grams, about 100 grams of that is tied into motions and feeling and this sort of thing. Now the sperm whale, with a brain of 10,000 grams, he's still probably only got 100 grams for running his body, and the whole rest of his 10,000 grams is a silent area for thinking. All the various things that we have. Yes, in the back.
If I'm not mistaken, the human brain developed its size. It became larger due to stimulation, external stimulation, standing upright, using tools, gradual process of growth. What factors might have been involved for the dolphins to develop a brain of such size?
Well, I don't know that our brain develops as a consequence of its use, of the use of the body. I think it's a sort of a creeping evolutionary process, about half a gram a century, so that the thinking processes are improved over the centuries, the potential of thinking process. And in the whales, it's probably already gone way beyond ours because of the huge size of the cerebral cortex.
What kinds of problems does a whale have?
Pardon?
What kinds of problems does a whale have?
I haven't asked them yet. The whaling industry is one of their major problems.
I didn't catch the answer on how come the whale's brains got so big without stimulation. Sorry, what was that?
Well, brains grow naturally very large without, you don't have to worry about stimulation. The genetics determines the size. The amount of programming that's available within a brain is a question of experience. And that it's the size of the programming rather than the size of the brain that we're talking about. So in the human, we talk about native intelligence, which is the built-in abilities of the brain. And then we talk about intellect, which is the accumulated programming due to our culture.
Earlier it was said that every breath that a dolphin takes is conscious effort. So were these dolphins harmed in any way on LSD?
No. That was why I gave it to them, to see if they would be harmed. They were not. Yes, way back there.
If you're in an isolation tank and you've cut off all sensory input, your brain still keeps thinking, and it either provides input to you or you start to see things, so that your brain is built so that it apparently physically cannot not see things. Why is this? Why is the brain built this way?
Well, when you cut off vision, for instance, and sound, you freed up a lot of the brain for other kinds of tasks than the listening or perception of outside signals coming from the eye. So if nothing's coming from the eye, nothing's coming from the ear, those computer parts that do the calculations on such things can create visions and sounds as if they're coming from the outside. So that your brain is large enough to be quite independent of its inputs if you're very careful.
Why does it have to? Why doesn't it just rest?
Well, you ask your brain why. Sometimes it just does rest, goes to sleep, but then it dreams. I feel that I'm a very small inhabitant in my huge brain, that I'm just one of the programs that the brain generates. So anything that I think about the brain is absolute nonsense. What the brain thinks about me, I don't know.
When you started your study with LSD, what was your original outcome? What was it you were hoping to achieve with that study, and how did that outcome change as your studies developed and developed?
All I can say is that the first few sessions with LSD were a hell of a shock. I didn't expect what did happen, so that any planning I did before that was nonsense. The cue to all this is that I then became a student of the unexpected, and the states that were induced under LSD were all totally unexpected, so I realized the best way to treat LSD was to totally relax in the tank and let things happen that would happen, rather than trying to program something in advance.
Is that a lesson we can all use in life in general?
Yes. Yeah, more or less. When I can get away with it. I'm looking for a wife to avoid a lot of this.
What would you say would be some of the most important things that we can learn from dolphins?
Well, I've written 5 books on the subject, but I would rather you didn't read them. Instead, go swim with the wild dolphins and find out for yourself. I give the same advice about using an isolation tank. Don't read what I've written. Experience yourself there and write your own books.
Do you know if when we eat tuna in Japan, if we are still contributing to the death of dolphins?
I don't know the latest on that. A friend of mine, Andy Moss, has recently got a law passed in the United States, and President Bush signed it last week, protecting dolphins from the drift nets in the ocean. It's now illegal to use drift nets in the United States, and the European groups are following that lead.
I just want to ask Dr. Lee, you've written and spoken before about zapping and about the level of telepathic communication that goes on among cetaceans in general. And you said you've actually experienced that kind of massive interchange once. With it, I mean, that sort of shared state of consciousness, I think a lot of human rituals throughout history have tried to get for human beings and create that with music or with religious concentration or whatever. But do you see any places where human shared states of consciousness might have crossover in bandwidth with cetaceans, so that we might have maybe not an intellectual communion, but at some deeper, more profound level, we might actually be able to tie into that?
Well, more and more people are swimming with the wild dolphins, and more people are having mystical experiences with those dolphins. So I'd say that, yes, it looks very powerful, that in the future there's going to be a lot of this.
That's good. You spoke before about having become a student of the unexpected, and I'm interested in why you wanted to become a student of the unexpected, why you continued it, and why you felt that you could, what your motivation was behind exploring that via drugs, via altered states of consciousness.
Well, I wish it was that intellectual.
Okay.
All that happened was that on my first 3 trips on LSD, I realized that I didn't have control of it, and that the unexpected constantly happened. So it forced me to be a student. You can never become a master of the unexpected.
What is
I guess my question is more, why have you chosen to pursue that? I'm interested in your motivation.
My motivation was to experience that which I could experience.